Welcome to Hidden Layers, where we explore the people and the technology behind artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Ron Green, and I'm excited about today's episode because we're doing something new. We're going to explore recent advancements in AI, and to help me unpack these complex topics, I'm joined by two of the sharpest minds in the industry. My co-founder and distinguished engineer, Si, and our Vice President of Engineering, Michael Wharton. Together, we're going to explore important recent announcements and dissect the technology behind them. Our goal is not only to inform, but stimulate thoughtful conversation on where AI is headed and how it's reshaping the world. All right, Michael, Si, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, so I'm excited about this new thing we're doing. We're going to explore important recent announcements. I'll kick us off. I'm really excited about the new Phi-3 model from Microsoft that was announced last week. It's really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is it's a really small model, but its performance is sort of out of scale given how small the parameter count is. So Microsoft is marketing this as tiny but mighty. So the reason I think this is interesting is that the models come in three different sizes. There's Phi-3 Mini, which has 3.8 billion parameters. Then there is a small with 7 billion parameters and a medium with 14 billion parameters. But the small model, the 3.8 billion parameter model, is already beating models with double that parameter count on many benchmarks. So for example, Llama 3 8B is not performing as well as this Phi-3 model, which I think is fascinating. So a couple weeks ago, Sebastian Bubeck, who is the VP of Generative AI Research at Microsoft, gave a presentation at the Machine Learning Labs Symposium in Austin. And he gave us a preview of Phi-3. And he really leaned into the importance of the training regime. So the fact that it's a small parameter count is really only important here because of the training regime. And so I've got some notes. So the model was trained on 3.3 trillion tokens for the smaller model and then 4.8 trillion for the larger model. But this is where it gets interesting. It was augmented with 20 billion synthetic tokens that were generated by GPT-4. And, he acknowledged that only Microsoft legally can do something like that. The motivation for this was for the way they trained it was how children learn. This idea that if they focused on really, really high quality content, they could maybe train a model with fewer parameters and train it on less data and still maintain performance. And he had a slide jokingly that read, "Textbooks are all you need." Obviously, a take on attention is all you need. The model wasn't trained exclusively on textbooks or anything like that, but they used a series of techniques to kind of assess the training data that's in, these large data sets like the crawl and the pile and things like that, and focus on the data that was the highest quality. Sebastian was very, very happy to answer pretty much all of our questions, except for when I asked him, can you describe the process for how you selected those 20 billion parameters? He just immediately said, absolutely not. So to me, that's a real signal that process is sort of where the magic happens. Architecturally, there's nothing unique about the model. But this idea of focusing on high quality content, and the fact that those synthetic tokens were the difference is really important. So a couple more points I want to make before I turn it over to you guys. One is that, Sebastian was understandably pretty proud of how performant this model is given its size. And I've used it. I'm running it at home. It is very, very impressive. Wow. I would say it's on par with like GPT 3.5 net. But it's always difficult to know. Yeah, it's really impressive. And Sebastian was talking a little bit about how, how little cost it was to train a model like this. But, several has pushed back on that from the perspective that with those synthetic tokens that were trained by ChatGPT 4.0, that's, that's like standing on the shoulders of giants, right? It's like, yeah, this is inexpensive. You just need a multi-tens of $1 million model as a starting point for your synthetic data.
Must be nice.
Yeah, it must be nice. But just a couple more points, but I really think this is fascinating. One is that there are already instances of Phi-3 running on Raspberry Pis. I've seen it running on iPhones. Yeah, no kidding. I've seen it running on iPhones. I've even seen it running on a Vision Pro headset offline, meaning absolutely fully on hardware. And I've seen some other examples where people have done long context versions of up to 128,000 tokens by just adjusting the parameters of the rotary position encoding, the theta parameter there.
Basically 1 million tokens.
Basically, you nailed it. Basically 1 million tokens. I haven't played around with that one yet. It's on my to-do list for this weekend, but I think that this is a really important milestone because we are now seeing that we can take models that are small to run on edge devices and they can perform at levels that were state-of-the-art 2 years ago. So, all right. So that was the first thing that I was really, really excited about. Michael, do you want to go next? What announcement recently has piqued your interest?
Yeah, I think that Apple's MM1 release, I think, is really it's not necessarily a landmark from an algorithm development standpoint, but I think it's a great signal from large device companies like Apple that are shifting toward this open research where they're trying to really accelerate what's happening in the public sphere. I think the incentive is that they benefit from this a lot because they're just hosting apps. They, Siri, yeah, sure, there's Siri, but really they benefit from people having high quality apps that are run on their platform versus someone like OpenAI who maybe you could accuse of open washing where, they're quote unquote open until it gets the secret sauce, much like the talk you mentioned just a second ago. But the really exciting thing I think about this paper is this shift toward open research, and it's also just an empirical design guide for multimodal LLMs.
Yeah, and on that point, really quickly, I haven't read that paper yet, but I understand that Apple did a really good job of sort of being transparent about a lot of the training and design and optimization of the ratios between like sort of data and even architectural components. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, on the data ratio thing, I think that's something that's relatively new for multimodal models to even care about that, just because they used interleaved text and image data, like what you would see with web pages, like, Wikipedia that gets scraped or something. They used image captions and then text data. And of those three, respectively, it seemed like a 5-5-1 ratio was pretty standard and a good rule of thumb to rely on if you're training these things.
Five times the text to image?
The 5 times interleaved to caption to text.
Okay.
5-5-1 interleaved caption text. And I think that's great because a lot of people that are trying to develop these things that are not Apple, maybe they'd be spinning their wheels for a really long time trying to figure out what that is. But that if they can just go point to this design guide, it accelerates a lot of development and a lot of startups that might have just gone under with R&D costs. Now they can look at things like, at these multimodal LLMs that take vision as input. It's an important part of it that you take an image and encode it into tokens that the language model understands. And one of the big breakthroughs of this paper, or the thing that they found, is that the design of that visual connector doesn't really matter. There's all sorts of active research about the design of how to convert images to tokens, but it turns out that things like image resolution, the image encoder itself, those types of things are much more important than actually just converting those things to tokens. So,
all right, let me unpill that a little bit more. You're saying that their research showed that the tokenization, meaning however those tokens are represented in that embedding space, that is less important than how they're encoded?
Yeah, how you take the embeddings that come from, I think they just use a vision transformer encoder.
Okay.
How you take those embeddings and convert those to tokens, that interface there is just kind of like it's a trivial part of the design process.
Okay.
Which is cool. I mean, it would take you a long time to figure out something like that if you didn't have millions and millions of dollars to go just throw a hammer at this stuff for a while.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I really like the fact that they are sharing not just the sausage, but how the sausage was made.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely
Exactly.
more open. Like, Apple is doing that. I believe Allen Institute is another organization doing like open research. And Databricks, the DRBX model, they also talk about their training recipe. And I think that the things like the data recipes, like how do you do interleaving, there are so many details that are important. And yeah, just super grateful that,
Yeah, I think AI even historically has had a challenge where a lot of people just present the results and they may talk about the architecture, but they leave out all of the nitty-gritty details about sort of data preparation and the flow of that data through the process, which, as these models get bigger and bigger, that can be an enormous part of the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
All right. Zizi, what is top of mind for you? What announcement happened recently that caught your attention?
Yeah, I have a couple, but let me start from a recent paper from Google called Well, I forgot the paper's title, but it's about the infinite length attention layer.
Okay.
I think that's super interesting because one bottleneck for the transformer models is the quadratic complexity in the attention layers.
Right.
I personally, right now I'm trying to learn how to train sort of like video generation models from scratch. And now I came to a bottleneck. I cannot make the context length much longer. But it is very important because when you generate the video, when you are generating the next video token, it's very important to for the model to keep temporal consistency by reasoning across a long time scale.
Right.
But I cannot currently get much more than like 4,000 token size context window, because if I cross that, then I get out of memory errors. The memory footprint is just too much. Of course, there's also the computational complexity, but the memory one is the blocking.
I'm kind of curious, before we dig into more on the sort of infinite context, what does that 4,000 token window give you from a time perspective in the video world?
Such a great question. Yeah, so that depends on the compression module, which is the VAE, the variational autoencoder part. Some people call it video tokenizer, similar to how you tokenize a long text into words or subwords. So typically, depending on which VAE you use, if you use the stable diffusion one, that basically breaks down a 256 by 256 pixel image into, I think the spatial compression ratio is 8. So that's, 32 by 32. But, I train my own VE, which does both spatial and temporal compression. And for the spatial compression, it's a 4 times compression ratio. So I got a 64 by 64 tokens per video frame. So that means roughly 4,000 tokens just in one video frame.
Just in one frame.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I want to look back more than like 3 video frames, well, that's like tens of thousands of tokens.
Right.
So,
and that's one of the big problems with this sort of quadratic performance you're talking about on the transformer. Okay, so with that sort of tee up, what is like an infinite context? This sounds almost impossible.
Yeah, so I saw this paper and I said, wow, that solves my problem. Because they in a paper they actually have a table. I have it on a paper here, but I can read the table. So it's about the memory footprint, and they compare several models. There's the Transformer XL. I don't know exactly what that model means in terms of the checkpoint, but Transformer ML is one, and memorizing Transformer is another version. The memory size for those are like 50 million and 183 million. But using Transformer, the memory footprint is only 1.6. So that's like almost like 100 times compression in terms of the memory footprint. And that, solves a lot of problem when you try to scale to very long context.
Right.
That's awesome. That gets us right back to, typical sizes that we deal with computer vision applications. I mean, those are usually in single digit millions and you can run it locally. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I personally think that long context is really important for some applications, maybe not all. I'm curious to what your thoughts are in terms of what applications where long context is very important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give you an example that I think where it's really, really critical is within computational biology. So if you're dealing with, let's say, the human genome, you've got billions of nucleotides for just one person, right? Well, so the challenge there is to get to a context window that can handle that is already a stretch. But imagine you want to do things in sort of a broader context. Like I would like to look at, maybe look at your genome relative to your parents and your grandparents so that you get a much, much broader view of the genetic complexity. We're really far away from that, right? Having a context window of several 100 billion just as, the starting point. So I think these larger context windows are critical and will be a blocking issue until we can resolve them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, I think besides video generation, another application I can think of is code generation. Like there's a recent announcement actually from Microsoft. It's the Copilot workspace.
I saw that.
So that seems pretty magical. Like you can just describe what you want, like what bugs do you want to fix, and then it will generate the solution for you. And I would imagine like code gen applications need a long context window because, as engineers, we all know that context is key when you develop, when you write your next line of code. You really need to fit in your brain, like, what the project is about, what's already written, what classes are there. Now I'm in this module, I'm trying to fix this bug. So, yeah.
So true. So absolutely true.
Yeah, I'm also interested how it affects the modern notion of this RAG pipeline that we always hear about every day because it's so sensitive to the retrieval process. I mean, the context you provide is the context you get for your inference. But if you miss some samples or you miss part of what's in your library of information, then it's truly impossible to get the output you're interested in.
Yeah.
So it seems like this would really help with that limitation as well.
100%.
That's such a great point. And just to pile on that, I think that's a super interesting point, which is whether you want long context or you want RAG. I think both are solutions to make more information, make use of more information in LLM. But I think that RAG is more like having access to a big library. Right. You can reach out to books. You can search. But having a long context in your LLM, that's almost like you have a very big brain. You can fit everything in there. That's such an advantage.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy, and that's the way I think about it exactly too. All right, so for my next topic that I think was sort of an important announcement over the last couple of weeks is the release of Llama 3 from Meta. Not a big surprise. We all knew this was coming. Meta's been releasing these fairly frequently. What blew my mind about this was they released the training cluster numbers. 24,000 GPUs were used, 16,000 of them concurrently.
And those are A100s too, or something like that. Those are beefy GPUs too.
Really, really big, beefy GPUs. And something like 15 plus trillion tokens within the data set. It was then further fine-tuned on 10 million human annotated examples. So a couple of interesting things. It's a vanilla transformer, which is, very, very common these days, but it's not a mixture of experts, which surprised me a little bit. We're seeing a lot of the big open source LLMs out there doing mixture of expert approaches. This is not using that. There's a couple of other interesting things. They moved away from GLU to SWIGLU for the activation function. They used rotary position encodings as usual. And there are context windows out there, again, just like like I mentioned with Phi-3, that are up all the way up to until like, million plus. What's really interesting is Meta says that in addition to the 8 billion parameter version and the 70 billion parameter version, which are both already released, they're still training the 405 billion parameter version, which they are going to open source. And they say that's coming soon. So that's going to be phenomenal. Now, I've had the pleasure of playing around with Llama 3 again on the side, the 70B model, in fact, and it's phenomenal. It's obviously, I've run sort of Phi-3 and Llama 3 together to compare. They both have really, really strong results. Phi-3 is shockingly faster at inference, as you might imagine, with billions of fewer parameters. But the quality I'm seeing in Llama 3 is on par with what you would have expected. And I will mention this for anybody that is wondering how they might be able to run these things at home. I'm using Llama, which is an open source project. It supports a ton of different open source large language models, including others from Google, Gemini, and Mistral, and all these other really exciting open source LLMs. So I think that that's really, really important because Phi-3 is important because they're giving us a chance to run near state-of-the-art models on edge devices. Llama 3, and I think especially, we'll mention this in an upcoming episode with the 400 parameter model coming out soon. I think that is critical on the open source side to keeping AI open, right?
Yeah.
We can't have a situation, I know you both agree with me strongly here, we just can't have a situation where a handful of big companies control all the technology and lock up what I think is going to be the most important technological, innovation of our lifetimes. So Llama 3, I think, is a really, really interesting and important announcement the last couple of weeks. Michael, I'm going to go back to you. What else is on your agenda to discuss?
Figured I'd break with the implied theme here and our model architectures here. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about AI safety and regulation.
Yeah.
There was an executive order that came out last October from the Biden administration, and they just had some guidance. I mean, it didn't have any teeth really. It wasn't doing anything revolutionary, but it had some requirements about reporting, transparency, and training, just things around how to think about addressing AI in the public sector and the government sector as well. But this new memo that just came out from the OMB is all about, it did two things that I think are really interesting. One is that it required every government agency to appoint a CAIO. And to me, that's not only signaling that AI is important to the federal government and it's something that they expect to be going forward, but it also seems like that implies that it's I mean, I'm biased here because we work at a services company, but it's a people problem. It's an expertise problem and not a thing that you just go get an AI product to fix your AI needs.
Right.
It's an expertise requirement, and they've signaled that that's true across all government agencies. And then in addition to that, it also requires that every one of the government agencies is transparent about how they're using AI, and they have to have a report on that at the end of the year.
Great.
So in December, we'll get an idea of, I know we see these SIBRs and, RFPs that come out all the time about what they want to do with AI, but we'll actually get a detailed look at how they're using it. And I think that's going to be interesting.
Oh, I love that. I love it.
That's super interesting. And Ron, I have a question for you. I think it's super interesting that you're able to run the newly released model so quickly. What is your hardware kind of specs?
Oh, for those, this is amazing, but I'm actually running both Phi-3, which this won't surprise anybody because you can run that on anything, but even Llama 3 70B on a MacBook Pro, even a MacBook Pro first generation M1. The key is I've got 64 gigs of RAM. So I think that's the magic number there.
Okay.
But the inference on those is really, really great. I think I'm even getting 12 tokens a second on the larger.
12 per second?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's really impressive.
Really performant. Yeah. So yeah, we're at the stage now where you can run these on laptops. I love it.
That is amazing, and thanks to the open source community. I mean,
yeah, big thanks. We'll definitely put links in the show notes to all of the projects and open source initiatives that we're mentioning here. Yeah. All right, Zizi, what's next for you on your interest list?
My next topic here is VLM, vision language models. So, I have a background in computer vision, so I'm very interested and keep watching this space. Vision language models are, part of the larger family of multimodal models, where, the input and output includes not just text, but also images, videos, audio, music, genomes, So vision language model is the ones that I mainly look at are, image question answering. Like the input is image and then a text prompt, and then the output would be a text answer. Mm-hmm. So this is not generating image, but taking an image.
Yeah, answering questions that you ask about the image.
Yeah, try to understand it. And then there are some new releases in this space. A notable one is called the InternVL. I think it's released in April pretty recently. And I noticed a very interesting difference between VLM versus LLM space. If you look at the landscape of open source models versus closed models, is when you look at the leaderboard, the evaluation leaderboard, comparing open source LLMs versus closed LLMs like GPT-4, the closed models are still leading, pretty significantly for LLMs.
Agreed.
But when I look at the leaderboard that's hosted on Hugging Face, actually the top one is the InternVL model.
Really?
And the GPT-4-V, that's the OpenAI's version of vision language model. That actually, is ranked lower in the leaderboard. So I find that to be super interesting. And the parameter size for the InternVL is, I believe, like 26 billion parameters. It's not small,
right?
But it's also not as huge, like 100 billion parameters.
No, not even close. Yeah.
And I find it super interesting that nowadays, when you say a small model, you talk about 3.8 billion parameters.
I know it is kind of funny how quickly it changed. Where now single-digit billion is tiny.
Yeah, it used to be a couple million was huge and like 100,000.
That's
that's a smallish model.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you a question about the that leaderboard. So this is language vision model leaderboards, right?
Right.
And I don't know if y'all shared this experience, but that aligns with what I see in practice. So for example, when I use ChatGPT-4 for any type of image capability, it's not nearly as impressive from a generative perspective. It does okay on question answering, but the generative capabilities are just not that great. Now, Sora is amazing, but I find that, for example, Midjourney to be just
light years ahead,
leagues better. And I think that's fascinating that some of these other initiatives, now they're obviously closed source, but that they're able to compete with companies like OpenAI that have tens of billions in capital backing.
Yeah.
It's a little surprising to me.
Yeah.
It is surprising. Yeah, I'm really blown away at how, I hadn't really played with GPT-4V a ton until I was actually preparing for a conference talk that I gave yesterday. And I just generated a bunch of images, a robot doing this, a robot doing that. Probably stands to reason that was relevant. But I was really shocked at how little variety came from the prompts that I was giving it.
Yeah.
Whereas with something with like Midjourney, you make one minor little adjustment and it's an equally beautiful but substantially different image.
Totally agree. I think that they're really, really in a league of their own there.
Yeah. And as I think about the application of vision language models, I'm also very curious about your thoughts too. So like recently there's, Meta made this announcement of, in the Ray-Ban glasses, those glasses now are integrated with the VLMs so that you can just look and say, you can talk to your glass.
Right.
Hey, what I'm seeing here. So that's a use case of vision language models, and you can also use it for assessing medical images, assessing photos of cars, asking about what's the damage, and how much is the repair, for example.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of applications for vision language models.
And on that topic, how do y'all think it at what point do y'all think that task-specific models are going to be obsolete, if ever? Like for the example you just gave, where you have medical images, theoretically you could throw this giant hammer that's a vision language model at it, and you can ask questions like, is there, a risk that cancer will develop in the next 5 years? I know we have a case study around that. But you could also solve that with a task-specific model.
Mm-hmm.
From my experience, even in the most impressive case of something like GPT-4, a task-specific model is going to outperform, leaps and bounds. So do y'all think that that's going to go away? Is this truly going to be a generic model? I don't know.
Good that's such a great question. I feel like it's a race ongoing. So sometimes it's the general models going up and having the upper hand, and sometimes it's the fine-tuned model for a specific use case using your specific data that's coming up on top.
Yeah.
And I see a recent paper that's comparing a general LLM versus a fine-tuned medical LLM on a clinical question answering task. And in that paper specifically, it's the Mistral 7B, that's the general LLM, works better than the fine-tuned medical LLM. However, we'll keep watching. Maybe next week there will be a new
in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Michael, I think that's a fantastic question, and I agree with you, ZZ. I mean, I think it's my mind kind of goes to two places. One is I think of the no free lunch theorem, the idea that you can never have one architecture or one sort of approach that will outperform everybody else, because there are always sort of contextual and inference biases that you can bake into the approach that may give you a relative competitive advantage. But I think in the short term right now, part of the reason that we're seeing things like, for example, like a general model Mistral outperforming is I'm a big believer that the reason large language models are performing so well is that there's just some fundamental truth of that idea that that goes back to the 50s. I think it was the linguist Surratt who said, you will know a word by the company it keeps. All the semantic meaning associated with words is contextual. And if you build a model large enough that it understands, these enormous data sets, it just kind of can't help but pick up some of these capabilities. But I don't think there'll ever be one that can outperform maybe some dedicated model, right. Unless that. So let's stick with the cancer prediction approach. A model, unless that data was in the training set, a model custom trained to perform that technique or that task, I think will be more performant.
And actually, another dovetail to that is that even if it's exactly as performant or even less performant, that model is going to be an order of magnitude smaller, and the inference costs are going to be so much cheaper, no matter how good the general case gets.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's also a question of trade-offs between cost and quality. And it's probably different for different use cases too.
Yeah. I saw this really funny tweet the other day I just had to share. This is from Mahir Patel, a research engineer at Mosaic ML. And he tweeted out, he said, my friends at Google DeepMind fear OpenAI. OpenAI fear God. And Anthropic fear themselves. I just love that one. But ZZ, you also you saw something really interesting from Sam Altman this week.
Yeah. It's also coming from a tweet, but I think it's a recent interview that Sam Altman did, and the sentence was, "It's our mission, and we will steamroll you." It's a pretty impressive statement, but I think there's quite a lot of truth to it. So the context is basically, I think Sam was talking about startups building applications around LLMs. And there are two types of startups. The first one are those that bet on GPT-4 to stay roughly at the same quality. So they maybe build a thin wrapper around it and expecting to have a marginal improvement. So that's one type. And that type is, basically Sam is warning that it is very risky to have a strategy like this. Mm-hmm. And the second type is to assume, well, GPT-5 is going to be much better than GPT-4, similar to how GPT-4 is much better than 3 and 3 is much better than 2. So almost feels like Moore's law, but for LLMs.
Right.
Yeah. So strategies that focus on future-proofing and betting on AI getting much better over the next several months or years is what Sam recommended. So I think although the saying is very spicy about it, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. Yeah. I'm also curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely designed to get in your head a little bit.
I think that's right.
And I think that if you have an emotional reaction to it, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot. And there's probably some truth to it, but from my perspective, we don't get to peek behind the curtain and get to see exactly what they're building or exactly how their algorithms work. But when you look at everything we've talked about today, all this competition and open research that's going on, it seems like the biggest moat they have is their access to compute resources and their buddy-buddy relationship with Microsoft. I think the research community is very impressive, and I just hope no one gets scared and stops doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the good news is we've got other, I think, large incumbents out there. I never thought I'd say this, but like Meta doing good work keeping open source, and Apple to your discussion earlier. Well, all right. Well, that wraps up our episode. I really appreciate you both coming on board here and having a conversation with me. We're going to do this regularly. I'm excited about it.
Thank you.
Thanks a bunch.
So much fun.
Thank you for listening to Hidden Layers. This series is hosted by KUNGFU.AI, a management consulting and engineering firm focused exclusively on artificial intelligence. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, or if you know someone we should feature, please visit us at KUNGFU.AI.